Thank you very much. Thanks for having me, everyone. Good to see some familiar and new faces on the call. So I'm from an organization called Beyond Equality. We're a charity that is set up to bring men and boys into these conversations about masculinities and, well, probably a bit more generally, what have they been socialized into? But for the purpose of gender equity, for improving mental health and well-being for them, and also creating more inclusive, safer, supportive environments. And one of the things just to emphasize from that is that we've got this focus which is on men, but not just as individuals, also really about that group that they're sitting within, that group culture that exists within the school or in other places. We're an organization that's worked with over 100,000 people, a lot of those in schools, but also in universities, sporting groups, community organizations, workplaces, all sorts of different settings. But today I'm mainly speaking about the work that's done by our schools team and reporting back on what they found. So just I took the time to watch as much as I could of previous presentations, and I've tried not to just repeat the same things again, although there's a little bit of that, and I think the repetition will maybe emphasize what's like really vital. But some of the things I wanted to highlight right from the top was it's very important we recognize that boys, this category of boys, is a very diverse group of people. When Mike said that, well, I actually inferred that Mike said that at the start of his presentation when I wasn't quite here, um, but in terms of how many versions of being a man do we need to put forward there? But I think it's also very important for us when we think about the messages that these young people are receiving, that we also understand they are receiving them very differently, depending on who they are and what circumstances they're in. So, and I think it's also important that we recognize that all of those young people, those young men and boys, are very important and deserve our attention and if possible, the right sort of support. So if we are going to make generalizing statements, like let's be very careful with what they say, what those are, and see if we can actually get some specific messages that go through to specific groups of boys. It's always a challenge when we're presenting work at at a national level or recommendations at a national level, but that would go a long way, I think, here. And you can think about that in terms of the differences between people who are living in cities or even living within London and some of the rural areas and regional areas, like the vast difference in experiences there. Or sometimes messages might apply more to a particular class group, or might not capture some of the experiences of the young people that are racialized, or it's not capturing the various cultural influences that people have on them. Sometimes we talk as if, and I've certainly been guilty of this in the past, we used to be called the Good Lad Initiative. So we talk as if all boys are influenced heavily by being the sporty culture or the lads or the cool kids or whatever else it might be. And that's not actually the experience of a lot of young people. They might not relate, or a lot of young men might not relate to those references as much. Um, and something to note is that also there are quite a few of the boys who, if given that opportunity and they're able to break out of some of those stereotypes and some of those molds, actually have some of their best friendships and the people they connect with and are supported by the most being women and girls in their life as well. So it's not necessarily that we just need the boys to think that they're going to be isolated and disconnected from women and girls and completely different from them. There's lots of commonalities that they'll find there. Okay. So for us then, like some of the key questions here are really about where are those messages coming through? How are they delivered to these young people? And how can we make sure that we're maximizing the quality of that sort of discussion that young people have the chance actually to digest those messages and work out which pieces they want to keep and which pieces they don't want to keep. And I think as much as saying what the messages should be, that the format they arrive in and the forum that those young people have to actually think about that for themselves is really vitally important in this space. We're not going to solve a whole bunch of complex problems with a nice PR campaign. We need to do deeper work, community-based work, work that maybe looks a bit different in different places. And it's going to be a long-term type of program because we're trying to set people up for the rest of their lives. And this is echoing the messages from Darshan and from Mike that I've heard, and from the previous panel that put forward. Um, okay, so in terms of some things that messages we give to the boys, one way to think about this is our approach, which is we're positive, we're compassionate, we're inclusive, and we will be provocative, or encourage critical questioning. But I'll start off with positivity. We want to come in with that message that the boys are important, that and here I'm saying typically one or two facilitators who are adult men stood in front of them, find them important and think that they're interested in them and interested in their outcomes. We believe in those boys to make lots of positive contributions now in their lives and also in the future. And we always reinforce that. So essentially, we're not putting them in this bucket of they're the problem, they're the ones who are broken, they're the ones who need to be fixed. Right? Instead, we're like, what's your potential? Says that, and I'm absolutely certain every person who's going to come and talk about this will come with that message, but it's crucial. Want to be compassionate here. So we're setting up spaces that are for growth and for development, but that can be a very emotionally challenging thing. And we want to be understanding as people struggle. Maybe they get defensive at times. Maybe they're questioning things that's about their father or their uncle or their brother's behaviors, or actually their own behaviors previously. And we want to understand that so they might need someone to hold their hand through that. And that if we actually give them that compassion, we might allow some vulnerability from them that they don't otherwise get to express and have held by people. And that can open up space for both personal development for themselves, and also the opportunity to feel empathy and connect with other people's experiences. And it's really important. And having said the word vulnerability, I think there's sometimes this message coming through now that men just need to be vulnerable. And I'd say that a crucial part of the sort of spaces, which are workshop-based spaces to live to boys, is that you need to actually create a social setting that's going to actually handle that sharing. It's being vulnerable with someone who doesn't listen to it and rejects it, or bullies you afterwards, is not a positive step forward for someone, which is why we really need to think about this at a community level, at a whole school level, all of these sorts of places, so we can actually build up those bubbles to start with, of spaces where people will actually be supported, and then that can expand out from there. Yeah. And obviously, well, maybe not obviously, but if we can give a young person a feeling of security, that there are at least some places in their life where they're able to express themselves and for that to be recognized, that's then something they can fall back on if they're put in those situations which are more challenging, and where they are being rejected, or there isn't actually space that they're being respected in. There's that. If we think about resilience not as being an individual characteristic, but something that's collective, I think it's a really important thing there. Third word that an approach is inclusive. So there, we recognize they're going to have different experiences. Some of those will have been very difficult. So if we're talking about consent and healthy relationships, we've got to remember that some of those boys will come out of homes or relationships themselves where they've experienced abuse or seen abuse. They might have been perpetrators of abuse themselves. And all of those different experiences are going to be in that room, and we need to be really careful about how we actually think about and approach those conversations. So one really important thing is that we want to be curious about their specific experiences and where they come from, their position in society, rather than just presume a lot of things about them. And but we also want to be honest with the young people we're working with, and challenge them critically on areas where they've actually taken on board ideas that aren't going to be helpful for them. And I think if we set up these spaces, we can do that in a way that actually says we are doing this because we don't want you to walk around with these ideas that are going to go do harm for you and do harm for others. And I again, Darshan and Mike both said things there that for me emphasize that the huge benefit of giving boys this ability to help develop and help choose who they are and who they are in a way that doesn't harm them and in a way that's beneficial to the people around them. The specific things we speak about in our workshops, I mean, we typically, if we're working in a school, we'll have three workshops. Uh, the first one about them, their emotions, their own identity. So that's a conversation about how they've been socialized, how do they want to actually live, and how they can make that jump. The second one's about their relationships with others, which is both about friendships and banter and connections, but also about relationships and healthy relationships and sexuality. And the third one is about their role in society more broadly. And here we can talk about allyship. We can talk about actually what contributions that they're making and where they get support from others. Uh, I'm just noticing time. Mike, how long do I have? Oh, you're on mute, Mike. Pardon me. 4 minutes. Okay. So out of all of that, just picking out some key things here that I haven't said. I mean, the emotional expression is really important. Um, and here, what we're seeing in some spaces is that there's now a belief that it's okay not to be okay. You know, that might be a phrase that's said, but still, even though the whole group might say that, each individual wants to be the guy that's solving the problems rather than the guy that's bringing um, his struggles. So there's still that piece of work that can happen there that goes to a deeper level than just that phrase or that sort of idea. Um, in healthy relationships, I mean, there's very specific things about what a healthy relationship is. That's really important, and consent, very important. I think here there's a paradigm shift by actually helping boys understand that they also have consent and can consent and don't need to do things that they don't want to be. They don't have to be up for sex. You know, that's something that there's often a great pressure about them that they're feeling, and I think it's important that they can take their time, they can do things that they want, they can also express themselves. Um, Pornography not being an accurate description, depiction of an intimacy around thinking about banter and friendship, and a lot of focus on impact of the words and consequences of those words. Um, Building up empathy and connection and seeing relatedness to people with different identities and backgrounds and characteristics. And then ultimately that they've just got this huge role that they can and will start playing in the future in around all these conversations. It's about letting them know that they can try, they can fail. It's okay to fail. They'll have other opportunities, and that actually they should be getting a lot of support moving on from there as they grow from those lessons. Um, some of the I think people have spoken a lot about the social media type of influences, this, gender roles, you got to fit into a box, essentialism coming from people like Andrew Tate. I mean, also some of that essentialism from people like Jordan Peterson. Masculinity should be this or shouldn't be that. It's not helpful. Um, something to bear in mind is this boys' victimhood area where there is this strong narrative getting pushed through various sources that they are actually the ones who are suffering. And it's really important to notice places where boys do have struggles. That's really crucial. But we need to be careful not to position this as like in a conspiracy sort of theory way, because that's how it's coming across to boys, via some of the sources that they get online. Uh, so, even some of the language that will come up where we might say, we're trying to talk about the changing educational attainments between boys and girls. And if we speak solely about boys having been neglected or left behind by changes in education, we maybe discredit all the ways that some of the changes in education practices have actually benefited some or many boys. You know, changing styles of education as well have also benefited people who've had different learning styles or who failed under previous systems. Okay, I'm gonna leave it there. Final message would be what we need to do here is positive development, get people involved types of messages, as opposed to fear-based narratives that either the boys are broken, or that there's no hope for them, or that there's a crisis that is insurmountable here.
Thank you very much. Just a couple of minutes for questions. We can come back to Daniel at the end if you want to.
Just one from me, Mike. Sorry. Daniel, it builds on what Mike said before, and it's something we're trying to capture. How are the boys actually selected? I mean, how do the schools pick the boys that you work with? We're
Yeah,
asking everyone that question, so.
yeah, and I think we're a bit different here. So, at the moment, our pupil-based workshops are for an entire year group of boys. So we say that we want to be working on the social norms right across that year group, and that we believe each of those boys deserves the opportunity to have that conversation. You know, it's an important part of their development, and um, that if you tried to pick out boys and target them as like these are the troublemakers or something like this, you're not dealing with the underlying dynamics that are actually motivating or incentivizing that behavior from those troublemaking boys. Um, so that that's our particular approach, which has yeah, I mean, yeah, that's our approach. That's what I'll say.
Okay. At one point, you said that you wanted to challenge unhelpful or harmful messages, it, but you didn't say what they were.
Uh, this would be with the boys. Yeah, I mean, like
Just a
a
few minutes
a
ago, you said
simplistic.
one of the things you wanted to do was to challenge unhelpful or harmful ideas that the boys had, but you s- that was a generalization. I was just wondering whether you had some examples.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a useful place to start would be the man box ideas that I'm certain that other colleagues have spoken about. Looking for those criteria, but giving you some examples, the way that might be more like actionable to today in these contexts, you could have there'll be a really strong message coming through that a boy's value is purely or a man's value is purely defined on how much money he has, or that sort of very materialistic success that's coming through. That's going to be felt by the boys as a lot of pressure, and also a lot of uncertainty, given that some of them can't really see a pathway towards financial stability, let alone the sort of millennial type of success that's been promised by some of these sources. Um, and that in turn leads to some negative valuing of other characteristics and other traits. Or on another point, there can be a huge amount of pressure for boys to be straight and also in different ways, promiscuous. So whether that's someone who can talk to lots of women, or that's someone who's got lots of women's numbers, or someone who's got a variety of nudes in their phone, or whatever it might be, different contexts, different spaces. It could be very different at some schools from other schools, but quite often there could be that idea there. And it's important one to challenge, because that sense of your value is defined by your level of heterosexuality is one that's internalized by lots of men to feel like they're a failure. And it's also one that leads into and reinforces some of the entitlement that those young men are almost taught. Like, well, if my success as a man depends upon me actually getting numbers or being successful for women, it becomes, especially with a couple other ideas slipping in, but it becomes a game. Like, oh, I'm going to go out, I'm just going to go out and prove myself to my friends. I'm entitled to try to prove myself. This is not me trying to connect with someone or me trying to find out what somebody else wants to do. Like, do we have shared desires here? And less of interest in consent, less of interest in the bodily autonomy or comfort or security of the women or girls that they're interacting with.